They gave him a 2-hour head start and laughed while they said it. 2 hours of running across a burning red savanna before Kale Vorik, the deadliest hunter in 3 sectors, would be released to collect his pelt. Elias Vance stood barefoot in the dirt, listening to the nobles of the Vosk and Compact place bets on how many minutes he would survive. The over-under was 19. Nobody was betting on the human. Nobody ever did. The hunting moon of Sarek had no name on any civilian chart. The Compact called it the Preserve. It was a private world bought and terraformed 2 centuries ago, stocked with prey animals from 40 different systems, and leased out to the richest nobles in the galaxy, so they could feel like gods for a weekend. The air tasted like hot copper and dry grass. The gravity was 8% lighter than Earth's, which the Voskan considered a mercy to the prey. Elias considered it a gift. 6 hours earlier, Elias had been a cargo handler on Relay Station Meridian, working a double shift loading freeze-dried grain into a Voskan luxury barge. He had been doing it for 11 years. 11 years of alien overseers calling him the beast of burden to his face, because translation collars rendered the slur perfectly. 11 years of lifting crates built for loader mechs because the dock bosses refused to waste a mech on a human. He had a bad back, a union debt, and a daughter's school fees due in 9 days. He was nobody. He was exactly what the galaxy wanted a human to be. Then Lord Cashin's private hunting hound got loose on the dock, and it went straight for a crate where a dockhand's kid was hiding from the heat. The hound was a Raka, 400 pounds of scaled muscle bred to run down armored infantry. The overseer screamed at everyone to clear the lane. Nobody moved fast enough. The Raka's jaws were already open, already descending on that crate, and Elias didn't think. Thinking was a luxury for species with redundant organs. He grabbed the cargo hook off the nearest pallet, crossed 10 meters of deck plating faster than a man with a bad back had any right to move, and swung it like an axe. He split the animal's skull on the first hit, and stood over the dead hound breathing hard while a 7-year-old girl cried behind him and 400 dockhands forgot how to blink. The dock went silent. You could hear the coolant lines ticking. You could hear the girl's mother sobbing her name. And then you could hear the overseer's boots, a whole squad of them, coming fast, because killing a noble's hound carried one penalty under compact law: death by hunt. No appeal. No advocate. The magistrate didn't even hold a hearing. Why would he? It was a human. The whole legal process took 11 minutes, conducted over a comm channel, while Elias sat in a security cell, still wearing his work gloves. 11 years of service. 11 minutes of law. There was a symmetry to it he would have appreciated if he hadn't been staring at a wall wondering who was going to tell his daughter. Be honored, Lord Cashin had said, peering down at Elias through the 6 eyes arranged in a ring around his narrow skull. The old noble had come to the cell in person, which told Elias everything about how rare this entertainment was. Most prey species are cloned. Vat-grown. No real survival instinct, no history. You will be the first wild human run on Sarek in 40 years. Kale has been bored lately. A bored kale is an expensive kale. Do try to make it interesting. I have a daughter, Elias had said. Not begging, just putting it on the record. Cashin's ring of eyes had blinked in sequence, which Elias would later learn was the Voskan equivalent of a shrug. Then she will inherit the betting proceeds if you survive past the over-under. It's more than most prey leave behind. Kale Vorik. Elias had heard the name on station broadcasts. The Pale Dagger. The Voskan's champion hunter. Vesari male. 9 feet of gray sinew and razor cartilage. A species evolved on a frozen moon to sprint across ice fields and drag down prey 5 times their size. Kale had run down a Tarvek bull in 4 minutes. He had killed an arena champion of the Salty hegemony with his bare claws. He held 211 confirmed kills on the preserve. 211. What was a dock worker against that? They brought Kale out onto the platform before the hunt so the nobles could admire him. The way you'd walk a prize animal around a show ring. Up close. He was worse than the broadcasts. The Vesari didn't have shoulders so much as they had architecture. Kale moved across the stone with that loose, soundless grace that only true predators have. Every step placed like he owned the ground's forgiveness, and the nobles pressed against the rail and shivered deliciously. He was beautiful the way an avalanche is beautiful. You are the human, Cale had said, looking Elias over the way a butcher evaluates a hanging carcass. His translator bead rendered the words in a flat, cultured voice utterly at odds with the fangs. I've never killed one of you. Tell me, what do I need to know? Elias had looked up at him, 9 feet of ice moon death, and thought about 11 years of double shifts, of crates that should have crushed him, of a bad back that screamed every morning and lifted anyway. I work dockside, he'd said. I lift things. Cale had considered this, with grave courtesy. Then I will try to make it quick, he'd said, and meant it as a kindness, and that was the part Elias couldn't stop thinking about. The hunter had meant it as a kindness. Here are the rules, the hunt steward announced, a fussy Voskan functionary with gilded translator fins. He recited them the way you'd read a receipt. Prey receives a 2-hour head start. Prey may not carry weapons, tools, or water. Prey may not leave the hunting zone. If prey survives until the second sunrise, prey is granted freedom and 1 million credits. He paused, and the nobles on the observation platform laughed. No prey has survived until the second sunrise in 109 years. The record is 6 hours, 11 minutes, set by a Granathi war beast. It weighed 900 pounds. One of the nobles, a young female draped in living jewelry, leaned over the rail. What does it weigh? She asked, pointing at Elias. 190 pounds, the steward said. Mostly water, I understand. The books say humans leak. The platform roared. Up in the climate-controlled viewing lounge behind them, bookmakers were already updating the boards in real time. Survival past 1 hour, 3-1. Past 2 hours, 20-1. Past 4 hours, 300-1. Second sunrise, off the board entirely. You couldn't get odds on it, because in 109 years of the Grand Rite, the bookmakers had never once had to pay it out. One elderly noble, a Voskan matriarch with a face like cracked porcelain, put 1,000 credits on the second sunrise anyway. Her companions asked her why. She said, because I've watched the feeds of how they died. 40 species. Every one of them died running away. Watch this one's eyes. She tapped her cane against the rail. He isn't looking at the hunter. He's looking at the terrain. Elias said nothing. He just looked at the horizon, at the long red grass shimmering in the heat, at the line of black rock hills 30 miles east. He had spent 11 years doing mental math on loading docks, calculating weights and distances and fuel margins in his head, because nobody gave humans the good scanners. Now he calculated something else. 30 miles, 2 hours. He could make the hills. Run, beast, Lord Cashin said, waving a bored hand, and do scream when it finds you. The acoustics on the east field are excellent. Elias ran. The first hour was about discipline, and discipline was the one thing a dock worker had in surplus. He didn't sprint. Every instinct screamed at him to sprint, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the platform, but he crushed the instinct flat and settled into a jog. Easy pace, rolling strides, breathing through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The savanna heat wrapped around him like a wet blanket. Within 20 minutes his shirt was soaked. Within 40, his whole body was slick, sweat running off his nose, his elbows, his fingertips. The noble's drones followed him overhead, tiny glinting things, broadcasting his humiliation to the viewing lounges. Let them watch. Sweating was the point. Here's what the Voskan didn't know, because the Voskan had never needed to know. Every elite predator in their galaxy was a sprinter. The Vesari, the Raka, the Tarvek, all of them. Explode, kill, feed, sleep. It was the only way they knew, because it was the only way their worlds demanded. Earth demanded something different. Earth had been too hot and too open for ambush hunting, so humanity's ancestors had invented a crueler strategy. They walked their food to death. They ran it to death, hour after hour under a killing sun, sweating to dump heat while the prey, fur-covered and unable to cool, slowly cooked from the inside. Persistence hunting. The most terrifying sentence in Earth's evolutionary history wasn't, humans are strong. It was, humans do not stop. The second hour belonged to the drones. Up in the viewing lounge, the nobles settled into their heated couches with crystal glasses of fermented star wine and watched a barefoot human trot across their private world like it was a morning commute. They made a game of it. They narrated. "Look how it bounces," one said. "Is that gate a defect or a strategy?" "Defect," said another. "Everything about them is a defect. They're a clerical error that learned to walk." Laughter. Glasses clinked. Somewhere in the corner, the elderly matriarch said nothing at all, and watched, and slowly, quietly, doubled her bet. The xenobiologist was pulled from his estate to join the broadcast as color commentary, because the nobles liked an expert voice to tell them what they were seeing. He read them the earth file out loud in a bored drawl. Diurnal, omnivorous, pack social structure, sweat-based thermoregulation. The nobles hooted at that one. Sweating. Their great secret weapon was leaking. It says here they evolved chasing wounded prey across hot grassland for 6, 8, 10 hours at a time. The biologist read, and paused, and for the first time his voice lost a little of its drawl. "Odd. I never noticed that line before." "Irrelevant," Lord Cashin said, waving a hand. "Kale has never needed 10 minutes. Behind him, precisely on schedule, a horn sounded. Low, joyful, ancient. The hunt was on. Kale Vorak was released from the starting platform at a full sprint, and the drone swiveled eagerly to follow him. He moved like a landslide. 9 feet of muscle covering ground in 12-foot bounds, claws tearing furrows in the red dirt, hitting 40 miles an hour without strain. The nobles cheered from the platform. On the broadcast feeds, the betting odds on Elias surviving the first hour collapsed to 1,000 to 1. Kale found the human's trail in 90 seconds. He didn't even slow down to read it. He could smell the fierce sweat on the wind, a rich, salty stink that made his primary stomach clench with anticipation. Humans leaked scent like a beacon. Pathetic. Heat had crippled herd animals that offered better sport. Except, Kale slowed after the second mile, nostrils flaring. The trail wasn't panicking. He'd read 1,000 trails, and terrified prey always ran in chaos, zigzagging, doubling back, bleeding speed into bad decisions. This trail was a straight line, a metronome. The strides were evenly spaced, the depth of the footprints identical for miles. The human wasn't fleeing. The human was pacing himself. Kale felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in 100 hunts. Not fear. Curiosity. He shrugged it off and accelerated. The third hour was about pain. Elias's bare feet were shredded by the red grass, which grew in silica-edged blades that sliced skin like paper. He bled freely with every stride, leaving red stars in the dirt, and he kept running. His lungs burned. His hip flexors screamed. His body begged him to stop, begged him with every step, and he filed the pain away the way he'd filed away 11 years of overseer insults. And he kept running. He reached the first slope of the Black Hills at the 2-hour 50 mark, and there, on a flat rock, he allowed himself 90 seconds. He urinated on his torn shirt, wrapped a wet cloth around his head, and climbed. Behind him on the plain, a gray streak of violence crossed into view, impossibly fast, impossibly beautiful, impossibly certain of itself. Kale took the slope at speed, and that was his first mistake. The black rock of the hills drank the sun all morning, and by midday it radiated heat like a stovetop. Kale's species was built for ice moons. His dark gray hide absorbed every degree of it. Within an hour of climbing through the broken canyons, chasing a trail that wound deliberately through the hottest, most exposed rock, his core temperature began to climb. He was a Vesari. Vesari didn't sweat. They dumped heat through rapid panting, and panting required stopping. The human did not stop. "You're a genius," Kale snarled at the empty canyon, and his translator bead rendered it in flat, furious English. A clever prey animal. He found the wet shirt draped over a rock, still dripping, placed there like a signature. The human had known. The human had understood from the first minute that this wasn't a chase. It was an endurance event, and on this burning red rock, endurance was a weapon only one of them carried. Kale's handler's voice crackled in his ear implant. "Kale, the nobles are asking why the prey is still alive. It's been 5 hours. Pull the trigger on this." "Quiet," Kale growled. He stared up at the ridge line, where a barefoot human stood silhouetted against the white-hot sky, watching him. Not hiding. Watching. For one vertiginous second, Kale Vorak, 211 kills. The pale dagger of Sarek felt the ancient ice moon terror of his ancestors. The terror of being seen by something that wasn't afraid. Then the human turned and jogged away, steady as a machine, and Kale roared and hurled himself up the slope. What followed, the hunting archivists would later call the canyon hours, and they replayed it in strategy academies across 3 sectors. Elias didn't run from Kale. He managed him. Every time Kale's speed threatened to close the gap, the terrain changed. The human led him up scree slopes where 9 feet of Visari slid and flailed, while 4 limbs of calloused dockworker scrambled sure-footed as a goat. He led him through slot canyons barely wide enough for Kale's shoulders, where the hunter's reach meant nothing, and the walls held the heat, like an oven. He crossed the same stream 4 times, not to hide his scent, Kale realized with grudging awe, but to keep his own body temperature down. The human was refueling on the move, scooping water in his cupped hands without breaking stride, drinking while jogging downhill. He'd grabbed a gourd-sized rock melon off a canyon vine and eaten it one-handed, rind and all, still running. His body was a furnace that burned anything. It had been burning for 9 hours, and it was not slowing down. He ate while running. A noble in the viewing lounge whispered, watching the drone feed. "Did you see that? He ate while running." "Digestion during exertion," the lounge's resident xenobiologist murmured, and his voice had gone the gray color of old ash. He was reading from a reference file that the compact scholars had always classified as a curiosity. Earth file. The human gut can process calories mid-exertion. Ours can't. Nothing in our sector can. It's one of the adaptations for. He stopped. "For what?" Lord Cashin demanded. "For persistence predation, my lord. On Earth, the human was never the fastest thing on the plane. It was simply the only thing that never had to stop." The lounge had gotten very quiet. On the main board, unnoticed, the odds on the second sunrise were moving. The 6th and 7th hours were a nightmare of heat. The temperature peaked at 49 degrees. The canyon stone was hot enough to blister skin, and Elias hopped across it on the toughened balls of his feet, climbing, always climbing, drinking nothing, sweating everything. His vision swam. His heartbeat hammered in his ears like a docking alarm, but his sweat glands, 2 million of them, more than almost any species in the galaxy, kept dumping heat, kept his core temperature balanced on the razor's edge of survival. Humans had jogged across the Serengeti under this exact sun for 200,000 years. This wasn't torture. This was home. Kale was dying and didn't know it yet. His panting had gone ragged. His magnificent sprint had degraded to a stride, then a lope, then a walk. His hyper-efficient Vasari muscles, designed for 4-minute kills, were cannibalizing themselves in the heat. Every time he stopped to pant, the human gained ground. Every time he pushed on, his core temperature climbed toward the red line. The drones hovered faithfully overhead, broadcasting it all, and in the viewing lounges of the preserve, 200 of the richest beings in the galaxy had gone very, very quiet. "Get him out of there." Lord Cashin snapped at the steward. "The heat index is spiking. Extract Kale." The steward's fins flattened. "My lord, the rules of the hunt. Extraction forfeits the kill. Kale invoked the grand right himself, decades ago. He would rather die than be extracted." "Then get the prey. Tranquilize the human. Drop it at Kale's feet. Let him finish it. And tell the feeds he made the kill." But the drones couldn't fire on the prey either. The grand right was the grand right. The compact's whole rotten edifice of honor rested on it. All the nobles could do was watch. Hour 8 was the cruelest, and Elias paid for every step of it. He had stopped sweating, which scared him more than the hunter did. It meant his body had finally burned through its water reserves, and from here on he was borrowing against tomorrow. His lips split. His tongue felt like a strip of cargo webbing. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of red grass and black rock, and the rhythm of his own feet. And inside that tunnel he held one image with both hands. A kitchen table on Meridian Station. A small girl doing arithmetic homework under a cheap lamp. Tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth. School fees unpaid. Future unpaid. He had spent 11 years lifting things for her. He could spend 1 more hour walking for her. 1 more. Just 1 more. And then, when that hour ended, he did it again. Behind him, half a mile back, Kale Vorik had stopped roaring. That was somehow worse. Hour 9. Kale Vorik collapsed at the base of a black rock spire and could not rise. His body temperature was 109 degrees and climbing. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel. He heard footsteps. Slow, steady, unhurried footsteps, crunching across the gravel, and he smelled salt and blood and that terrible, impossible calm. The human knelt beside him. Kale tried to raise his claws. His arm weighed 1,000 pounds. "Go ahead," Kale rasped. His throat was cracked leather. "Take your kill, prey. It's earned." Elias looked down at him for a long moment. Then he sat down in the thin shadow of the spire, crossed his shredded feet, and said, "Not a prey. A dock worker. And I don't want your kill." "Then what?" Kale panted. "Do you want?" "I want you to say a word." Kale's cracked lips pulled back from his fangs in something between a snarl and a laugh. "What word?" "Yield. Say it to the drones." Kale Vorik yields to the human. "Say it, and I'll do the one thing your nobles won't do." Elias held up his hands, empty, blistered, bleeding. "I'll carry you down to the stream in the low canyon, and I'll sit you in the water until you can walk again. You're dying of heat, Kale. It takes hours. I've watched men die of it. It's a bad way to go. And I've had a long day to think, and I've decided the galaxy's got enough corpses." Kale stared at him. Snorts 9 hours on the burning rock, and the prey was offering the hunter water. In 211 kills, no one had ever offered Kale Vorik anything except fear. "Why?" he whispered. "Because where I come from, you don't leave a man on the mountain. Doesn't matter what he was trying to do to you an hour ago. You just don't." The drones hovered. 200 nobles held their breath. In the viewing lounge, the elderly matriarch leaned forward on her cane, eyes bright, and whispered, "There it is. That's the whole species, right there. Cruel enough to run a god into the ground, kind enough to carry him home." And Kale Vorik, champion of the preserve, the pale dagger, the apex of the apex, closed his eyes and said the word that would echo across 3 sectors by morning. "Yield." They say the walk down took 3 hours. Elias carried 9 feet of Vesari across his shoulders, the way he'd carried grain crates for 11 years. 190 pounds of human hauling 300 pounds of dying alien. One step at a time, down the burning rock. The nobles' drones filmed every step. You cannot buy footage like that. You cannot spin it. By midnight it had been viewed 4 billion times. At the stream, in the cold water, Kale wept. The drones, for once, looked away. Even the steward found somewhere else to point the cameras. Some things belonged to the 2 people in them. The night that followed was the longest of Elias's life, and Kale never left his side. The rule said the hunt ran until the second sunrise, and the rule said the prey had to survive it. And there were things on Sarek that came out after dark that even the Compact's terraformers had learned to leave alone. Twice, something big moved in the grass beyond the firelight, drawn by the smell of blood and exhaustion. Twice, Elias reached for a stone. And twice, a gray shape unfolded itself from the shadows, with a low Vesari killing hum, and the thing in the grass decided it had somewhere else to be. The pale dagger guarded his conquerors, sleep like an oath. When Elias woke shivering at some black hour of the morning, there was a heavy thermal cloak over him that hadn't been there when he closed his eyes, and 9 feet of scarred hunter sitting motionless between him and the dark. "You should rest," Kale rumbled, not looking at him. "Your species requires it after exertion. I read the file." "When did you read the file?" "Hour 7, on my retinal display. While you were killing me." A pause. Snorts. It was not comforting reading. The Compact had a problem, and they spent the entire night arguing about it behind closed doors, while the feeds played the canyon footage on a loop. Elias didn't know it, but by midnight his walk down the mountain had been analyzed frame by the Compact's military colleges. A soft, clawless, furless species had gone into the deadliest hunting ground in 3 sectors, with no weapon, no water, no shoes, and had dismantled the greatest living hunter, using nothing but thermodynamics and a refusal to quit. The generals weren't laughing at the word leak anymore. They were running simulations. The simulations were not comforting. One admiral reportedly watched the stream-carrying footage 3 times in silence, then stood up, closed the file, and said, "Find out what they want. Whatever it is, it's cheaper than finding out what they can do." The grand right was law, and the law was absolute. Prey that survived to the second sunrise went free, with 1,000,000 credits. But Elias hadn't just survived. He had defeated the champion, spared the champion, carried the champion down a mountain in front of the entire galaxy. Half the compact wanted to quietly kill him before he became a symbol. The other half, the half that had watched 9 hours of footage and done the math on what humanity actually was, wanted something much more urgent. They wanted to make sure humans stayed on their side. On the second sunrise, on the platform where they had mocked him, Lord Cashin himself walked down to meet the human. The old nobles, 6 eyes couldn't seem to settle on a single place on Elias's face. The dock worker stood barefoot in a stolen robe, feet bandaged, standing in the place where, 2 days ago, they had told him to run. "The credits are yours," Cashin said stiffly. "And the freedom." And his mandibles worked. The words cost him more than any ransom he had ever paid. The compact formally petitions the government of Earth to open negotiations for a mutual defense compact. Effective immediately, we find that we have reevaluated the utility of your species. A pause. We find we have reevaluated everything. Funny, Elias said. 9 hours ago I was mostly water. The viewing platform, packed with nobles who had come in the night to see the ending with their own eyes, went absolutely silent. And then Kael Vorak, wrapped in cooling bandages, leaning on a frame, limped forward onto the platform and did a thing no Vesari champion had done in recorded history. He knelt. He bowed his 9-foot frame all the way down until his scarred gray forehead touched the stones in front of a human dock worker's bandaged feet. "You carried me off the mountain," Kael said, and the translator bead carried it to 4 billion screens. "By the laws of my people, older than the compact, older than the hunt, my life is yours. Where you walk, I walk. What you hunt, I hunt. And the first thing we will hunt, friend Elias, is this." He raised his head and looked at the nobles. The preserve, every pen, every clone prey farm, every betting book. It ends this season. Who here wishes to argue with us? Nobody did. Not the bookmakers, who had lost more money in 9 hours than in the previous century combined, and who paid the matriarch's 1,000 credit bet at odds that bought her a small moon. Not the steward, who had recited the rules like a receipt 2 days earlier and now read the manumission with hands that shook. Not Lord Cashin, who had lost a raka, a hunt, and a century of certainty, and stood in his own viewing lounge watching his champion kneel to a dock worker and understood, with the cold clarity of a man watching his world's axis tilt, that the galaxy his grandchildren inherited would not be the galaxy he had ruled. Nobody argued. Nobody dared. Elias went home 3 weeks later with 1,000,000 credits, a 9-foot alien brother who insisted on sleeping on the floor of his apartment, and a message from Earth's surprise government asking whether he would consider, just consider, a role as a liaison. He told them he'd think about it after his daughter's recital. She played the violin badly, gloriously badly, and he sat in the front row with his bandaged feet up on the chair in front of him and cried without a trace of shame. And Kael Vorak, 9 feet of folded gray menace wedged into a seat built for office workers, cried too, and frightened no one, because by then every soul on Meridian Station knew exactly who the Pale Dagger was and exactly whose recital he was attending. He paid the school fees in full. He paid his union debt, and on his first morning back on Relay Station Meridian, he clocked in for his shift at 0600, because the crates still needed loading, and Elias Vance had never once in his life left work unfinished. The overseers didn't call him the beast of burden anymore. They didn't call him anything. A few of them, the youngest ones, started showing up before shift with water flasks and good boots, stretching in the dawn light like they were training for something. Maybe they were. The galaxy had seen the footage. Everyone was doing the math now. They just watched him lift crates built for loader mechs, and somewhere in the back of every alien mind on that dock, the same quiet thought kept repeating. Humans don't sprint. Humans don't pounce. Humans just keep coming, hour after hour, under any sun, through any heat, and they do not stop. The galaxy had spent a century laughing at humanity's lack of claws. It took one barefoot dock worker and 9 hours on a burning rock to teach them the truth. Claws win the first 4 minutes. Everything after that belongs to us. And on Sarek, the preserve closed its gates that same season, just as Kale had promised. The cloned prey pens were opened. The betting books were burned in the observation lounge's own hearth. And on the spot at the base of the Black Rock Spire, where the pale dagger fell and the human refused to kill him, the locals erected a small, ugly, unglamorous monument. No crystal, no quantum harmonics, just a slab of black stone with a cargo hook mounted on it, and a single line carved in 2 languages, Voskan and English. No one agreed on which of them chose the words. It reads, "The race is not to the swift." Tourists ask what it means. The Vesari guides just smile and tell them to drink their water and start walking. If you loved this story of human endurance and the day the galaxy's greatest hunter learned what persistence really means, smash that like button right now and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi stories. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. Could you have made it to the second sunrise? Or would you have stopped at the stream? And tell me, what should Elias and Kale hunt next? Until next time, keep your pace steady, keep your water close, and remember, they only think you're prey because they've never seen you run. See you in the stars.